Good morning. The leaders of Scotland's four main parties join us live this morning. Nicola Sturgeon, leader of the Scottish National Party, Willie Rennie from the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Jim Murphy, leader of Scottish Labour, and Ruth Davidson from the Scottish Conservatives. Well, Luke, let's start, Nicola Sturgeon, with the issue of full fiscal autonomy, which has dominated much of the debate this week. And just to explain to people watching, this is the idea that Scotland should raise all its taxes and run all its own affairs apart from defence and foreign affairs. Now, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, I know you would like to cover the deficit that would arise by greater economic growth, but according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, there would be £7.6 billion if you got full fiscal autonomy you would have to find to cover spending on things like welfare and and health and all the rest of it in Scotland. Where would you find that money?
Well, firstly, I think this week we've seen the Project Fear campaign that dominated the referendum revived by these three unionist parties trying to talk down Scotland and assert that we're not capable of running our own affairs. Now, let me take directly the figure that you've cited. Even if you accept that figure, and there's reasons why you wouldn't, that's a figure for 1 year. Now, full fiscal autonomy, even if there was an agreement in principle this year to introduce it, is not going to be introduced this year. It will take several years to implement. Actually, these parties are all saying they'd vote to block it, which shows we will need lots of SNP MPs to extract any new powers.
These are Institute for Fiscal Studies.
Well, let
me make the point. These are Institute for Fiscal Studies figures. Fiscal Affairs Scotland, which is another group of economists, have projected the deficit forward, and they say even by 2020, if Scotland were to have full fiscal autonomy, you'd have to find £8.8 billion
Firstly,
to cover the gap.
in 2 out of the last 4 years and 7 out of the last 10 years, Scotland's been in a stronger fiscal position than the UK. If you project forward, Scotland's deficit is projected to decline. So our onshore revenues, not taking account of oil, are estimated to grow by £15 billion by the end of this decade. Our deficit is declining. But at the heart of this debate about
according to Fiscal Affairs Scotland, the deficit would increase by 2020.
Scotland's deficit is projected to decline, and that £15 billion figure that I've given you comes from Fiscal Affairs Scotland. But let me get to the heart of this debate. This is a debate about whether Scotland should take more control over our own economic decision making. I see in one of the newspapers today that Labour's going to promise that we have more control over welfare, but they want to deny us the revenue raising powers to pay for that. So do we take proper control over our own finances, or do we leave ourselves at the mercy of continued Westminster cuts? Because the cuts to Scotland's budget over the past 5 years has been a cumulative £12 billion.
Or even tried to answer the question of where you would get the money to fill this gap.
I don't accept this point that deficits mean you shouldn't be in control of your own fiscal affairs. The UK deficit...
hang on.
The UK deficit...
Are you saying you'd just borrow all the money?
Well, having powers means that you grow your economy to get your deficit down.
Sure, but
I
already accepted that. Maybe over the short to medium term you could grow the economy and cover that deficit. But from day one you'd have to cover it. Now, it's not unreasonable to say, look, on the face of it, you can put taxes up, you can cut spending, or you can borrow the money. Or some combination.
Of course, full fiscal autonomy would come with borrowing powers, but as
you borrow the money.
Well, as full fiscal autonomy is implemented over a period of years, as you get more powers, you use those powers to start growing your economy, growing your revenues, and get the deficit down.
But the point I was going to make here, you still haven't answered the question how you finance a £7.6 billion deficit initially.
The UK right now is in deficit to the tune of almost £100 billion. The UK...
And they borrow the money, so why don't you just say we'll borrow the money?
Scotland would have borrowing powers, but what these parties have got to answer...
So are you saying you're borrowing the money?
No, but borrowing would be one of the tools that we would have to use. But
what are the other ones then? You put taxes up?
No, we would grow our economy in order to grow our revenues.
No, but initially, to cover the deficit initially.
Well, but I don't accept that figure initially. We'd cover the deficit the way other countries cover deficits, partly by borrowing, but then you use the powers you've got to grow your economy. Now, at the heart of this debate is a clear choice for Scotland. We accept... Now, Jim seems to think Scotland is subsidised. Worse than that, he seems to think that we should remain subsidised. I don't. I think we should take control, because the alternative and the question that these parties have to answer is what is the magnitude of the cuts they're going to impose in Scotland. Because at the heart of this, what they argue is Westminster is a protection for Scotland's budget. It's not. Continued Westminster control of our finances means continued cuts and continued austerity for Scotland, and that's the reality.
Because let me ask this here, because I just think we can accept Nicola sitting there going and saying This is Project Fear 2. This is 3 other parties ganging up on me, ganging up on the Scottish Government and ganging up on Scotland because for some reason the SNP is Scotland. The SNP isn't. Scotland's much more than the SNP. And this didn't come from us. You're right in saying that this came from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. It also came from a group of Scottish-based economists that projected the gap to be bigger. And I also don't think it's good enough for Nicola to sit there and say, yes, we wanted independence, which meant control over all of our finances and all of our everything by 11 months' time. And we want full fiscal autonomy, but it's OK, because there's a massive hole, but it won't happen yet, and it'll be 5 or 6 years. So you can't say I want control, I just don't want it yet, and then blame us for the fact that your sums don't add up. Your sums have never added up.
Let Jim Murphy, he's been very patient. Let me ask you a point.
Of course.
Isn't Nicola Sturgeon's point reasonable? She seems to be saying, we'll just borrow the money to cover the deficit. That's what every government in the world does, so what's the problem?
As often as the case, Nicola makes a dreadful point in a pretty reasonable way. Look, I said during the week in one of the earlier debates that Nicola's entitled to her opinions, but she's not entitled to her own facts. She's making this up as she goes along. Nicola, you said that Scotland will make up this £7.6 billion. Now, across the world, economic growth is projected at a certain level. To make, oh, Nicola, hold on a second. To make this £7.6 billion up, Scotland would have to grow at twice the rate of the rest of the entire advanced world. So how would you do that? No, Nicola, how would you do that? Answer my question and I'll answer yours.
Explain away £100 billion?
Nicola, please answer the question. I know you're going to say Trident in this answer. OK, so let's put that to one side, right? So that'll be part of your answer, Trident. So all across the world...
How do other countries deal with deficits, Jim?
Nicola, I'm asking you the question.
Until they grow their way out of deficits.
All across the world, economies are due to rise by 2.4%. Under these figures, to make up this deficit, you'd have to grow by double that. What is the magic policy that you have that the rest of the world doesn't have on this issue?
You're taking control of your own affairs, having control over
America has control of its own affairs.
Control over business taxes,
America, France, Germany has control over its own tax.
Passenger duty.
Nicola, all of these countries already have that. Now, what is it? Nicola, you've got a magic wand. You don't have any policies.
You ask me a question. Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question.
Willie Rennie is going to hit me unless he gets a chance to say something. Willie Rennie, let Willie have a word.
Go on, Nicola, let me have a chance. Go on.
No, I want to ask him a question.
You haven't come close to answering your own question yet, Nicola.
He's happy to bandy about billions.
You have a magic wand. You don't have a policy. You have a magic wand.
Willie Rennie. OK, hang on. You can answer it in a minute. Willie Rennie.
£1 billion. It's a dreadful mistake. You talk over it. Nicola, we know you're in trouble here. Just talk over everyone else. It won't work.
All right. Let Willie Rennie have a word.
Let me put this in context. £7.6 billion is over half the NHS budget in Scotland. In 1 year, half the NHS budget. Over a full parliamentary term, it's £40 billion. Now, we're already trying to get the books into balance in the United Kingdom. We're struggling to do that. We want to get it back into balance so that we're robust economic conditions for the future. Now, what the SNP are proposing to do is to compound the difficulties, the challenges we're facing to get that economy back on track with an extra £7.6 billion worth of difficulties. And they have no answers. I mean, one of the key policies, Gordon, you asked this question of Nicola, how are you going to get out of this problem? One of the key policies that Alex Salmond proposed before was corporation tax. He says we're going to cut corporation tax by 3p more than anything that George Osborne would ever propose. They've abandoned that now. So one of the key elements of the economic policy of the SNP has been abandoned. So they're in an even deeper hole than they were before. They have no answers.
This is coming from a guy whose party is proposing £30 billion of additional cuts that will hit Scotland's budget hard over the next couple of years.
You're promising £180 billion worth of borrowing that will cost £3 billion worth in debt interest by the end of this Parliament.
For 1 year, you ignore the fact
to high levels of debt is even more debt. I think that is unacceptable and economically irresponsible.
I propose an alternative
Can I try to establish some facts here? I know this might be a revolutionary thing to do.
Gordon, are you still here?
Yes, I was beginning to wonder myself. You seem to dispute the 7.6 figure. What's your figure?
Well, it's a 1 year figure. Now, if you take the last 4 years...
Are you disputing it's accurate?
Well, for example, it takes no account of the fiscal framework that would be negotiated if fiscal autonomy was agreed. And let's not forget, these three parties are saying that they will block full fiscal autonomy, which shows...
Okay, then?
No, it shows we will need...
It's such a silly idea that it's okay we block it.
It shows we will need lots of SNP MPs in the House of Commons to extract any new powers
it shows that you're
for
desperate for the Labour
Scotland
Party to dig
from
out the whole of your own making.
Sorry, I don't understand what you said. What you said, the 7.6 billion figure is wrong because of what?
It takes no account of the fiscal framework that would be negotiated.
What does that mean?
Well, for example, it assumes a contribution that Scotland would make to things like debt interest. Something like a quarter of Scotland's estimated deficit is debt interest payments. It assumes
you want to increase it by borrowing
it assumes the contribution we would make to defence. Now, the negotiated fiscal framework would come up with actual figures, but the more fundamental point I'm making
so you want to abandon your responsibilities for
I don't want to, I'm simply making a point that the framework that would be agreed would be a negotiated one.
So you
but
take
the more
all the
fundamental point I'm making...
If
you let me make two further points. Firstly, these guys would have opposed more fiscal autonomy for Scotland when our finances were in better shape than the UK's, which they have been for 2 out of the last 4 years, 7 out of the last 10 years. Over the last 34 years, we've paid more per head in tax than the UK as a whole. And they ignore the fact that over the next few years,
the
Scotland's
IFS
deficit...
are wrong because they're not taking account of...
I'm saying that figure is not relevant because it's a snapshot, one-year figure, even if you accept it.
Can I make a helpful suggestion?
Well, over the next 5 years...
Can I make a helpful suggestion? You have had your government's civil servants over the past month draw up documents with detailed figures about how your idea of increasing public spending in the UK would help balance the UK budget. Will you give us a commitment today that you'll have those same civil servants draw up detailed documents showing why you think the IFS figures are wrong and what your figures are
the IFS
for full
figure
fiscal
is
autonomy?
a snapshot
No,
one-year
but will
figure.
you do that?
Well, let me put forward two figures that I think are fundamental.
Why is it your government can come up with figures for the UK government, which it's got no responsibility for, and not come up with any figures for the policy which is your flagship policy short of independence?
Because my policy is about Scotland taking control of our own fiscal affairs so that we don't have to be at the mercy of Westminster cuts. Without any additional powers over the next 5 years, our onshore revenues are estimated to increase by £15 billion.
Nicola,
that's 5 times the estimated decline in oil revenues. If we start to get the let me finish, Jim. If we start to get the transfer of more powers over our economy, over welfare, over the things that we need to do to lift people out of poverty and into work, then we can increase the rate of growth even faster. Now, that's
Ruth
the
Davidson.
issue at the heart of this debate.
Well, and I think that, you know, the answer that the SNP have had as their holding answer through all of this has always been, we'll magically increase growth. But what they haven't acknowledged is that actually the UK is currently the fastest growing G7 major economy anywhere in the world. And Willie's actually right on this. There was a plan to have a lever to try and encourage growth in independence that was in the white paper. It was to cut corporation tax in order to encourage investment and growth from companies. But Nicola shelved that plan. So she hasn't actually told us how she's going to magically increase growth to twice the amount that the rest of the UK has, which is already the fastest growing major Western economy in the world. She just says growth will fix everything, and it's not true.
Let each of these parties say right now
Nicola,
how many billions pounds...
Nicola, this has been a one-person show so far. Maybe we should get involved in this. But I asked you at the beginning, to fill up the £7.6 billion deficit, Scotland would have to grow at double the rate of the global economy. What is your policy?
What is your policy?
Hold on. Nicola, what is your policy? And the other
if you're going to ask Nicola Sturgeon a question, we all ask her at once. She's not going to know what the question is.
It's a straightforward question, and if this was judged by the length of the answer, I think give me one. What is the one that will double economic growth? What's the one?
All right.
Well, don't be economically illiterate. There's no one policy that creates economic growth, but a range of policies using the powers that you want to block Scotland having.
Nicola, that's an answer about what you won't do.
Let's have a targeted use of business tax powers to create and generate growth. Let's half on the way to abolishing air passenger duty.
Let's
increase the work allowance so people have more money to earn. Let's increase the minimum wage to £8.70. Let's get more people onto the living wage. Here's another one. Let's transform the provision of childcare to get more women into work.
You're in a hole. You should stop digging.
Can I get an answer to the question?
My worry here, Gordon, is that we've got a policy that Boris Johnson supports. Boris Johnson supports full fiscal autonomy for Scotland and the abolition of the bond. I just finish with this point, and then of course
you were supposed to be asking a question.
Boris Johnson supports full fiscal autonomy and the abolition of the Barnett formula, and I worry that